But if I look at somebody that I need to be a top salesperson and they're just, Johnny on the spot, quick, when do I start, all that, I know that's a D, right away, because they want to get to the details. And so you kind of tailor your hiring and onboarding based around knowing the DISC. It's so powerful.
Podcast. Today we have Michael Morrison with us. And Michael, one of the things that was great when we first started connecting was just the timeliness of our conversation. I was literally, we walked in, I found out a little bit about what you do, and then I immediately moved into my Grant Cardone coaching environment. And the first thing we hammer on that one is talking about DISC. And people are like, disc golf? I'm like, no, not disc golf. No, DISC. And so what I want to help people understand is, number one, what is DISC? Why is DISC important? And how impactful could it be in your recruiting, in your client relationships? And the one thing that I always hammer people on is in your personal relationships. If you can understand DISC, man, that solves so many issues when you look at your relationship with your spouse or anybody else who's around you. So, Michael, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity. Let's get started. So what would you like to know about DISC?
Well, so I've been a fan of DISC. Oh my gosh, I can't even begin to remember when I got introduced to DISC. It was probably, I'm going to say 2015, 2016, I think was when I first got into it. And as soon as I realized what DISC was, I realized that it really allowed me to hone the skill of solving all the management problems that I had, because I was looking at the lens of the world through my lens and not understanding that, why are people not understanding what I'm saying? Why are they not, listening to the way that I do things? Why are they not connecting with what I'm trying to put out there as a leader within my organization? And it was because I didn't understand that there's other lenses of how people can interpret the world. And so let's talk a little bit about DISC and number one, what it means to you, and then how it can really help with really better collaboration.
Absolutely. So DISC is predictable behavioral traits. So, and we all have them. We kind of have our core. If you think about, some of us are introverts, extroverts. I mean, there's some of us that are introverts that we can work on being more communication, have better communication skills. And then there's others that we just shut down. Like, we don't like going to networking events. There's other people, we walk into networking events and we control the room. And if we don't, we get a little irritated. Or there's people that are socially active. We all have them in our families. We have that Aunt Betty, that Uncle Charles that, everything's really calm at the family gathering at Thanksgiving. And then those people walk in, the whole mood changes. And I hear people, oh, we don't have that in our family. And I'm like, well, then you're probably that person. If you don't have one in your family, you're probably that person that comes in and changes the mood because you're socially active. Yeah. And so each letter of DISC stands for different things. And so D is kind of your dominant, driven, all about the accolades type person. The I's are all about influence, being influential. That's your Aunt Betty that walks in the room, changes the mood. She controls the room. Your S's are a little more stable, which about 70% of us all have a little bit of S in us. And then your C is your compliant. They cross all the T's and dot all their I's. They're the people that if they're in a parking lot and there's a stop sign and there's no one around, for miles, no one around, they will still stop in that parking lot because you're supposed to. The D's on the opposite end of the behavioral traits, they'll fly right through like, what stop sign? There's no, so that's the kind of the difference in the behavioral traits, and it works in communication too.
Yeah, the when you look at the DISC, and this is something that I think is really important. There's no wrong DISC. It's an index. No. And a lot of people think, oh, I've got to be more this way. It's like, no, I think you just have to be more you and really just understand you. One of the podcasts I did a while ago was with a fellow by the name of Nick Shelton, and he wrote a book called The Introvert's Guide to World Domination. And what basically he did is he really, dived into the idea that if you understand who you are as an introvert and you understand what fills your cup, and you're able to deal with that element of what fills your cup, then the things that deplete your cup, you're going to be able to handle those more effectively. So when you go into a room and you're socializing with somebody and it's not comfortable for you, what are some techniques that you can do because you realize that you're an introvert? But you're really, your powers, your superpowers are just somewhere else. And you just need to have that ability to be able to get them out. So once you realize where you sit on the desk and you say, here's what my strengths are and here's what my challenges are, then you're able to handle both of those a lot more effectively.
Absolutely. And the power of DISC is understanding others and how to communicate with them. And I'll give a quick example. So I'm an SC. So, but I understand how to communicate with D. So if I'm walking into an office, high-powered person, first thing I look for is what does their office look like? If I walk in and there's accolades all over their walls, regional director, top salesman, year after year, all these accolades, I know that more than likely that's a D type person. Ds don't like small talk. They want to know what's in it for them and when can we start. And so I put all my visuals away because if I bring all those out to a D, I know for a fact they're never going to do business with me because I'm annoying to them. For a C on the opposite end of the spectrum here, I will bring all my visuals. I'll try to bring as many as I can because they want to see all the details, all the graphs, how it works, how long it's going to take, how much does it cost, what are the payment. They want to know all the details. So just by me being an S doesn't make me wrong anywhere, but what helps is that I understand how to communicate with these other type of people and recognize those so that I can close deals better. It works with, you mentioned your social life. It helps with relationships. It also helps with your kids, how to get them to respond. And I just had a perfect example yesterday working with another business that's a partnership. And the money guy in the partnership is a C. I mean, he's a high C. Everything's compliant. He likes all the details. He can't get his partner to do anything. His partner is a D. So last week we sent assessments for DISC to recognize who they are so we can communicate better within the organization. The C took his DISC assessment within 5 minutes. As soon as we sent the email, he was done. The other guy, nothing. And he was getting frustrated. And I said, do you mind me shooting an email over there? He said, no, please do. So I sent an email that says, can you get this done by 1 today? Boom, done by 1. I was quick, short to the point, and that's the power of DISC. The other partner was expanding. Here's what DISC is. Here's what it does. Here's how it's going to help us. And the guy was just like, no, just tell me what to do. That's the difference in DISC and understanding everybody's behavioral traits.
Yeah, with we go to the relationship, and I'll bring this personal for a moment. Back when I first was starting up my company, my wife, we were just newly married, and I just kept on. We would argue, and we would argue quite a bit. And I mean, not saying that we don't still, but we argue differently now. We communicate now. I think it's probably communicate differences now. But back then we argued vehemently, and it's because I wanted her to see the world through the way that I saw it. I'm a DI, and if you didn't get that already, yeah. And my wife is SC, and she's highly focused on details. She wants the full picture. She needs stability. She looks for all these things, and so she would look through the lens of like, why does he not slow down? Why does he not, and so we were so coming at a logjam in communication because we were looking at through how we see the world and not giving the other person the ability to be able to express themselves, because each of those components are very different. Like if you're SC, the world needs SC or the world will fall apart. Yeah. The world also needs the DI, because the DI is going to, let's just get things done, and is actually going to bring that person to getting things done. So both have value. And there's also some others, like you could have an IS or you could have a DC, and there's some other combinations. Most people focus on the DI versus the SC because those are the ones that are sort of the ones that have the hardest ability to communicate with each other. And we actually built my business, my whole business. I own a mortgage business, Real Approved Mortgages in Canada. And we built a whole business model around the DISC mindset, because we knew that for a mortgage broker to be successful, some of them are so good at paperwork They're so good at compliance. They're so good at dotting the I's, crossing the T's, making sure that the pay stubs are all perfectly in order and everything done. But they're not good at going and finding business. And then some of them are really good at going and finding business, but it's just a hot mess, everything else. When you couple those two people together, you have just massive excellence. Because to me, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah. And that's how we help. One of the ways that we help businesses grow and scale, because most business owners that come to us, well, I just can't find good employees. And so that's where we start. That's kind of the common, I can't find good employees. And so we go through the path of, building out their organizational structure, and then kind of what does the hierarchy of your roles within the company look like? And then what is what industry is your company in? And then let's assign those combinations of ideal traits that we'd like to have, because you can't have a whole team of A players. Nothing will ever get done. But you also can't have a whole team of C players because again, nothing will ever get done. So you have the aggressive, the D's that go out and sell, and then you have the C's that come in and do the back end, the admin, that type of stuff. So you got to have a combination of C's, S's, I's, and D's all the way through your company. And once you understand that, then you can tailor your questions for hiring based around those ideal traits. So if it's someone that you need that's compliant, you ask questions related about their organizational skills. Don't ask them if they're organized, but you want to ask them, for instance, we have one company that actually will go out and look in their car to see how messy it is. Now, there are some people, I understand, you can have a soda cup in this, but there's just some people that they look like they live in their car. Okay, if I need somebody that's organizational compliant, more than likely that person's not going to be a fit, right? Mm-hmm. But if I look at somebody that I need to be a top salesperson and they're just, Johnny on the spot, quick, when do I start, all that, I know that's a D, yep, right away, because they want to get to the details. And so you kind of tailor your hiring and onboarding based around knowing the DISC. It's so powerful.
And, one of the things that I think when you look at the breakdown of DISC per role, the first thing I think a lot of people make a mistake in is looking at there's a specific DISC for a specific role. When specifically I'm talking about sales, because I've trained salespeople all around the world, in Japan, all across the UK, all across the States, and everywhere. And people always think, well, you need a DI in order to be the best salesperson. And it's like, well, you need a salesperson whose DISC resonates with the audience that they speak to.
Exactly.
And so I was in one company where we were looking at, they did medical devices, and I was trying to find the top sales rep, because I always want to know who's the big dog, because I need to hit them first. If I get the big dog on my side, everything's going to go smoothly. If not, this is going to be a hard day. Yeah. And so, I would ask the sales managers, that person over there, they're pretty good, like the Harvey Specter style person. I'm like, is that number one? No. That person's number two. And then I picked out, is it her? Is it him? Is it her? And then he just started giggling. And I'm like, well, then who is it? And he said, him. And pointed to this guy in the corner who, had the pocket protector, had the big thick rimmed glasses. When I shook his hand, it was like shaking jelly. I had to wipe my hand afterwards because he was so nervous to talk to people. But he was the number one sales rep. Well, why? Because he was published in all of these papers, and because he sold at the lab level. So when he walked into a lab, he spoke the language, and he spoke in the way of the high S, the high C that they spoke. The number two sales rep spoke to the board and spoke in the level of the D's and the I's. And so because they were able to resonate with their audience using their superpowers, that's when they saw massive success.
Yeah. And that's what I was talking about when we kind of assess an organization, is what industry they're in. And that relates exactly to what you're saying. Yep.
Absolutely. So when you go into a company and you start seeing, I love the one thing we talked about earlier is the idea of the small business. When you're saying that they are having a hard time hiring, and it's all about the people out there, when really for them it's looking into themselves and looking at their own DISC and what deficiencies do they have and what is their superpower, and realizing that that is the number one reason that's holding them back. It's not that there's not good people out there. It's something they have to look internally and say, it's because I'm not communicating with the good people out there in the way that they want to be communicated with.
Absolutely. The business owners that say they can't find good people, I know immediately where to start, and that's with them, the business owner, because like you said, there are great employees. They just may not be a fit for what you're needing. But if you don't even understand what you need, then yes, you're right. You'll never find the right employees for your business.
Absolutely. And if you know this is the way that you communicate, and you can recognize that the way you communicate is stopping you from being able to attract the right people for the right position, you can look internal and make those shifts, or recognize maybe you need to search in a different pond to find the people that you need to get to match just the way that you're going to communicate.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, it goes down to understanding your disc and then understanding the disc of the people that are out there.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with understanding your weaknesses. For S and C's, we're C's more than S's, but we're kind of known for being indecisive. I would say for C's, they are very indecisive. I mean, that's the perfect word. But for S's, I don't know that we're indecisive. It's just we want to have the information to base our decision on. So it's not being indecisive if we're not, but I understand that that's kind of one of my weaknesses. So I work on myself going, am I taking too long to make this decision? Is there information I don't have, or am I just procrastinating? And so understanding my weakness, it helps me make decisions faster. I mean, those are kind of the powers of understanding who you are individually as well. So it's not about being the wrong disc profile. It's about understanding who you are, understanding those weaknesses. And for each disc assessment that we give, it also shows them how to communicate with other people and get things done faster. I had a business partner that was a high D. I don't even know if he had another letter with him. I mean, he was just strictly a high D. And I would send these things like saying, I'd send an email like, can you take this bank deposit? Because this particular bank had about 15 locations, and we had an officer at different locations. And so I said, can you take it to this bank on this day by this time to this person, blah, blah, blah. Didn't get done. I was like, dude, like I said this had to go. So my coach at the time said, why don't you just be very specific? Shorten that thing, because when he's looking at emails, when he sees those emails that have a lot of text, he's like, yeah, that's going to take too long. This one's real short. I'm going to do that one faster because they're all about getting things done, checking the boxes, accolades. So he was going through and getting all the short emails fulfilled before, and then he'd come back, which he never did, to the longer ones because he never had time.
Yeah. And that's and one of the things that the D should be responsible in that equation is to understanding the value of the S and the C that they bring to the table. Because if the D doesn't recognize that, that's going to be a massive deficiency.
Yeah.
Because if they go, look, I'm not really good at the detail kind of a thing, but that doesn't mean details aren't important. I just need them to be really important to the person that's around me.
Absolutely.
And if they can do that, then that's where they can really shine. Because I have a friend who runs a company called Sunbelt Equity Group, and what they do is they syndicate real estate. And his whole thing is around everybody's going to have a superpower. And you can never go into these big deals, $100 million real estate deals alone. Like, forget about it. You need a team because each person's going to bring a different superpower. But you have to recognize the value of that other person's superpower, or else the whole relationship is diminished.
Yeah, the C's for administration, I'll take them all day long because I know they'll do it and do it right, and I can sleep at night knowing it's going to get done correctly. I know a lot of S's and D's that get frustrated with all the questions a C will ask, but I'm like, settle down. If they're asking questions, you haven't given them enough information, because once they have the information they need, they will get it done right. Like, that's their superpower. You can count on that being done right.
Yeah, I mean, if you're jumping into a plane that's going up in the sky, you really hope that it's being built and have the maintenance done by a C.
Yeah. All the details, all the instructions followed. Yes.
If you're going out and saying, I want to go to a party, And, I want that probably run by somebody who has a little bit of an S, right? Yeah. And, they're going to bring the energy, they're going to bring that level, but probably a C to make sure that everything shows up. And probably a D for making sure that everything happens, that it gets scheduled. And the S to make sure that, all the little connective tissues are put together.
Yeah. Yeah. We're all people pleasers, but just in different ways.
Yep.
So you got to find which people pleaser do you need? Which type of people pleaser do you need? And then you can assess there. But yeah, it's a great tool for business and life.
Now, one of the other things about a DISC is the idea of the two elements of how you act when you are in isolation, we're going to say, and then how you act in a more social environment. So some people, when they're in their, we'll call it their power base, whether it's a small group or whatever it might be, they might be a higher D, we're just going to say.
Yes.
But then maybe they get into a social environment, maybe they're at a trade show or they're at a wedding or there's something like that, their DISC drops, their D drops and say something else goes up. Talk to me a little bit about that and what your understanding around that element is.
Yeah, so I know the different DISC assessments use different terminology, but for ours, we call it our core dominant. So for me, my core dominant trait is an S. I can't change that. Our core dominant is based on our upbringing, the culture we were raised in, trauma events, dramatic events, anything that happened as we grow up. And those we can work on, but we can't change internally. If I'm an introvert, which I'm not, C's are more of an introvert, but if I was an introvert, I can't ever change that. I'm always going to feel uncomfortable, but I can go to a Toastmasters class and learn how to speak, communicate better, and be comfortable in front of other people, but I'm still going to have that gut feeling of being uncomfortable talking in front of a crowd. But that's kind of our core dominant. But then we have two other sides of the spectrum. That one is how others perceive us. So what you were talking about is how we kind of change our demeanor based on what social event we're on. And then the other side is how we see others as they see us. So that's where you talk about kind of that Jekyll and Hyde type thing of we portray someone that we possibly might not be. I know I was an introvert back 20 years ago, a couple of decades ago. I was kidnapped by gunpoint at an early age by my biological father, so that kind of led to some drama and trauma growing up in my life, some seclusion and introvert and things like that. So I did go to a Toastmasters, and I learned how to overcome that quietness that was within me. And so that's another powerful thing about DISC is you can learn how to manipulate your own feelings to where I can be social basically with other people, learn to be social. Even if it's uncomfortable, I can still learn how to communicate.
Yeah, one of the tips that I heard, again, around the introvert being social is surround yourself with other introverts and be social with them. And because it becomes easier because they're going to go through the same communication struggles that you might go through as an introvert. And I love when you break down those three categories where you say, look, this is my dominant trait. This is it's innate to me. It's going to be next to impossible to change this trait. And then the other one is, this is how others perceive me. So in other words, they're going to look at me as, yeah, Steve, that guy you just go, never seems to stop. Right. And then it's how you perceive yourself. This is the interesting one, is how you perceive yourself through those other people's perception of you. And that one I find the most interesting because I want your opinion on where you reconcile that with what your dominant trait is and put those things together. And if those become more in alignment, is that a better thing? Or if they're further from each other, is that a better thing?
I think that's a good question. I think it really depends on the circumstance that you're in as to how closely those will be or how far apart that would be. Especially with an introvert. I mean, that's just, I look at, so my wife she has D in her. So when they say opposites attract, I really think that's a good thing because she will pull me along and I will hold her back a little bit, but we meet in the middle because we're both DISC everything. Like we understand it. So we don't argue as much as I would if I didn't understand disc, because I'd be like, slow the heck down, you know, like, and she'd be like, come on, what are you doing? When our refrigerator broke last year, 10 years, 20 years ago, oh my gosh, that would have been a battle. I would have had all the Best Buy ads. I would have had this and that and the reviews, and she'd be going, let's just get a fridge. Come on, can we just get a fridge? It's out. We don't have one. We need one today. But because we're both disc, aware, it was such an easy process. We had a refrigerator within a couple of days. I was a little bit, are you sure? And she was like, yeah. And I said, okay, well, let's go. So,
well, I think, most people, when they first assess disc, I think they look at that, everybody focusing on the D and I. But I think the other thing is everybody thinking about the S and the C. I mean, as somebody who's a very high D and somebody who's a very high I reconcile my own bank statements. Okay. I've programmed software. I've done all these systematic things that normally one would think is in the territory of the C space. And so the idea of how we can see ourselves, perceive ourselves, and this is the one that we talked about how others perceive ourselves, but sometimes is how do we perceive ourselves to what our real dominant trait is. So if we look at this as almost like a fourth quadrant that we haven't talked about, is that we might perceive ourselves to be one way where our innate dominance is actually something else. We're just not allowing it to flourish. Yeah. And so that's something that I kind of wanted to ask a little bit about on that one.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I want to reconcile bank statements. I'm just saying I do it, and for some reason I do get secret joy out of it, and I don't know why.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that one. Because now we're kind of getting into the psychology of it and the neuroscience of it, and which I, along with this, have studied neuroscience for that reason, to try to understand why things like that happen, what you're talking about. I know that for us, when we send out the assessments, I can almost assess without even getting the assessments back. The C's on a dime, they'll fill it out, they'll be done. Now, they're slow to get it done because these assessments, it's one of those that has a statement and about 5 different comments afterwards, and you have to pick the one that's most related to the statement and one that's less likely. They'll analyze that thing to death. Like, every statement, they'll just read it and reread it. But they're the first ones to turn it in. Your S's will come next. Your I's will come next. The D's, I always have to send a follow-up email with specific, get this done by this time today, and they'll get it done. They can take, for most people, most C's and S's, it will take them, for C's, it'll take 15 minutes. For D's, literally about 3 minutes. I mean, they're done. The difference between the D's and the C's also is the C's and S's are eager to learn who they are. The D's and I's are not as much because they feel vulnerable, like I might be exposed. That's one thing that D's don't like. They don't like to be exposed. My wife even says that. I hold my cards close to my chest. So you can really tell a lot from different people. But going out on a limb, kind of what you're talking about, going the complete extreme opposite of who you are, I can't answer that, to be honest.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I love indexes because they give us a starting point. Yeah. And I think one of the things that kind of comes out of what we just talked about is that we can't look at it as to the be all and the end all to solve all aspects of communication or any challenges that we're having in our business. But what we can do is use it as a starting point, a framework. Because if we all walk down the street and you look across and everybody we don't wear Armani or we don't wear Gucci. I don't know any brand names, but we're just pretending like I know them. We don't wear any brands. And instead of on the front of our shirt, it has a chart, with a color-coded chart, which shows what our disc profile is. Imagine how much better people can communicate.
Yeah.
As a starting point.
Yeah. And that's critical to understand. And I have this little cheat sheet that I carry with me. One side, it says how to identify each individual. And then the other side, it says how to communicate. And I'll hand this out to people and say, now there's 10 things here, how to identify a C style. If you're a C and you go, yeah, that's not really me, that's fine. But the rest of it is. That's fine, because it's not going to be 100%. But like you said, it's kind of a bar. We're setting the bar of who are you more likely with. And there's nothing wrong with understanding who we are, because it's going to help us communicate better.
Absolutely. And especially if you go where they are.
Yeah.
And communicate in the way that they communicate. That's one of the best ways to be able to really reach into people. And I know when I'm talking with my high C's, my high S's, or my high, those people really want to be valued. I mean, I think everybody really wants to be valued, but they want to be valued in a very different way than somebody in the other. And if you can communicate that way, you're going to create so much better collaboration with either your spouse or with anybody else who's out there.
Yeah. It's kind of goes back to the old spouses that, where do you want to go for dinner? I don't know. Where do you want to go? And 30 minutes later, they're still like, did you decide? No. Did you decide? Nothing would ever get done if you're with the exact same person, So that's what I love about DISC is you got to have communication. You got to understand how to communicate.
Absolutely. And that's what made this podcast great, is that we have all the letters represented on this podcast. We are covered. We have the full D, the full I, the full S, the full C.
Yeah.
We are at 100%, and what makes this podcast complete.
Yeah. And we're not just blowing smoke out here. We're talking from personal experience too. So
Absolutely. Well, Michael, the best way for people to reach you would be at the businessownershipsimplified.com website. In other words, BOSS, Business Ownership Simplified for Success.
Yes.
That's the best way to reach you.
Absolutely.
And the other thing that I thought is really great is that you've got your podcast as well, which is the Small Business Pivots podcast.
Yes.
And I think people should check that out, because I think it's great to hear the stories that are on your podcast. And is there anything else that I should leave them with that the audience needs to know?
They're very active on LinkedIn. So if they want to communicate directly with me, they can do that, or email me, michael@michaeldmorrison.com.
Beautiful. Well, Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure having a chat with you today, going over one of my favorite concepts, which is the DISC profile. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And guys, this is the Money, the Mindset, the Mentoring podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.